46% of all of Russia's oil refineries have been destroyed. They are going to be forced to shut down oil wells or to literally pump crude oil all over the Siberian wilderness. This has happened to Russia one other time. Russia is in an area where they require international support, and people are talking about making Russia pay reparations, not about giving aid to Russia to prop up their economy. That's bad news for them. Hey guys, Paul Warburg coming to you back from the Utah wilderness today. It is freezing cold today, so I'm going to try to record this quickly because the longer I stand here, even though I was warm while I was moving and hiking up here, the colder I'm going to get. Now, that doesn't just apply to the human body, but it actually applies to pretty much anything in movement, including Russian oil flows, which is what I want to talk about today. Now, I've talked about some of these themes on the channel before, but it deserves an update today because there have been some big updates in regards to Russia's oil industry just over the past couple of days, and that are going to continue to come probably over the next couple of weeks and next couple of months. Russia has a pretty serious oil problem right now, which is no surprise to anybody. They are not able to export as much of their oil as they are historically used to because of sanctions that have been placed on them for invading Ukraine. They have tried to turn to non-traditional markets to help with this, but that has not allowed them to make up the numbers that they are used to hitting. Now, for Russia, this is a much bigger problem than just lost oil revenues. In fact, in the long term, the bigger issue has nothing to do with the lost oil revenues at all. But the bigger issue has to do with the potential for big chunks of Russia's oil infrastructure to actually freeze up if Russia has nowhere to sell or store their oil. Obviously, we all know that Russia is pretty much the coldest place on Earth, which creates significant challenges when it comes to oil extraction and oil transportation. And those challenges are only made even more difficult by the fact that a lot of Russia's oil reserves are in the coldest regions of Russia. To transport this oil to the markets where they are sold, that oil has to go through thousands of kilometers of pipelines, which is very expensive infrastructure that has one massive vulnerability. If oil wells are forced to shut down, the wells could freeze up, but also the pipelines could freeze up, causing irreparable damage that essentially forces the pipelines to have to be replaced. Thousands and thousands and thousands of kilometers of pipelines that would cost tens and tens of billions of US dollars. Now, I'm not just making this up. In fact, in previous years, before Russia invaded Ukraine, Russia spent a lot of effort trying to reinforce exactly this point. When OPEC would try to artificially raise oil prices by getting all of the different OPEC nations to restrict supply of oil, basically shut down oil wells, Russia always refused to do this because their argument was, our oil wells are in Siberia, and if they ever shut down, we might not get them started back up again. Now, since Russia invaded Ukraine, they have tried to change that tune to show resiliency in their oil industry. And they have tried to say that this is actually not the case and Russia's oil industry is just fine. But that actually is not true, according to their own previous words. And Russia is in a very, very bad spot right now. Now, really quickly, there is a sponsor that made the research behind today's episode possible. And it's sponsors like this that allow me to continue to do deep research like this, then create and share content with you guys completely for free in an era where complex research is increasingly being locked behind paywalls. If you're like me, you're sick of spam calls, junk mail, and people selling your data. Today's sponsor, Incogni, helps address the source of a lot of these problems, which is data brokers. Data brokers are in the business of collecting and selling your personal information, even without your consent. This can be all sorts of different details. Things like your name, your phone number, your address, or even your online browsing habits, which they then sell to all sorts of different parties, like marketers, background check websites, employers, landlords, or even health insurance companies looking to raise your rates based on your online browsing habits. And the worst part is, a lot of the information they collect isn't even accurate. So imagine being turned down for a job, or for a home rental, or paying more for your health insurance than you otherwise would because somebody purchased information about you that wasn't even true. And Cogni helps put a stop to this by removing your data from hundreds of different data broker websites, a process that could otherwise take you literally hundreds of hours. It's simple. All you have to do is sign up, give Incogni permission to act on your behalf, and they will get right to work, finding your data, flagging it, and demanding that it be removed. If you're interested in that, you can get a massive 60% discount off an annual plan by using the link in the description of this video and using the code Warburg. Again, use the code Warburg for a 60% discount on an annual plan of Incogni. So Russia's oil woes are caused by two major problems, one of which I have already discussed, which is sanctions, and another of which is a little bit more direct. For the past several years now, Ukraine has been bombing Russian energy infrastructure, including oil storage depots, but also including Russian oil refineries. And just this week, it came out that 46% of all of Russia's oil refineries have been destroyed. Now, this is a huge problem for Russia, because as they run out of places to sell their oil, places to refine their oil, and places to store their oil, they are going to be forced to shut down oil wells or to literally pump crude oil all over the Siberian wilderness. Those are going to become their only two options if they don't find another way. And the pressure is just ramping up and up and up and up. And there is another development that is making this even worse for Russia. It's no secret that Russia has been operating a huge fleet of shadow oil tankers to keep their energy flowing and to keep the revenues flowing in from energy. But another big reason that this shadow fleet is so important to Russia is because it is one of their only outlets to actually keep all this infrastructure online and to keep their oil wells and their oil pipelines from freezing up. That is why the Russian shadow fleet has been working so hard, and Russia has been willing to actually sell their oil at discounts to nations like India and China. Because even if Russia doesn't turn a profit on its oil in the short term, they still have to have a place to send it. And very soon, the tides could be changing to where the shadow fleet is going to start to get hit a lot harder. The shadow fleet actually accounts for 80% of Russian oil exports right now. And so 80% of all Russian oil revenues, which in turn makes up a huge percentage of the Russian budget. And up to this point, I made a whole video on this, so I won't repeat everything. But up to this point, Ukraine and Western nations have not actually taken that much action against the shadow fleet. And that is arguably not because they couldn't take action, but because keeping Russian energy on the market and keeping Russia from destabilizing in the short term was a more meaningful objective. But now we see the tides are changing. Recently, Ukraine demonstrated that they had the ability to bomb the facilities that load the oil onto Russia's shadow fleet of tankers, at least the ones around the Baltic Sea, and presumably they have the same capability down by the Black Sea as well and anywhere else in Russia. And what this would mean is that Ukraine, if they wanted to, has shown the world that they can stop the shadow fleet at any time without sinking a vessel in the middle of the sea and killing an international crew and causing a major ecological disaster. And so Ukraine making this flex shows maybe they're potentially going to be willing to change their strategy and start to tighten up Russia's energy infrastructure even more. And even more than that, just this past week, we have a lot of nations in the EU now getting together to talk about plans to actually start seizing Russian shadow fleet tankers, something that they have not done up to this point except for in limited circumstances. Now, it turns out that seizing a ship in international waters is actually extremely legally complicated, more complicated than I ever thought as I was reading about this. So this will probably take some time before it's fully implemented. But the reason this is such a big deal is because, number one, it signals a really big shift in the way that people are looking at the war in Ukraine, where they are now willing to exert much higher economic costs on Russia. And secondly, because this is a big deal, because these economic costs really will be quite severe once this goes through. For Russia's shadow fleet of tankers, about half of that fleet, which equals about 40% of Russia's oil revenues, which again make up a huge part of Russia's federal budget, have to pass through the Gulf of Finland before they get to whatever their destination might be. And this puts them all in an area where they're very exposed to seizure once the legal stuff is figured out. And very quickly, this shadow fleet could be taken offline by a huge percentage. Now, it won't be the entire shadow fleet, but it turns out that that doesn't matter. You don't have to eliminate Russian energy revenues to force their energy infrastructure to go offline. You just have to take out a huge chunk of them. Because once they are no longer able to export at the capacity that they are producing, that's when stuff starts getting shut off. Now, for just a picture at how bad this could become for Russia, from a historical standpoint, this has happened to Russia one other time. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the oil infrastructure was shut off, and it all froze up, and it all had to be replaced. The Soviet Union, or rather Russia, could not afford to do that. But because the international world wanted the collapse of the Soviet Union to be a success, Russia was able to secure a lot of foreign aid from a lot of Western companies that were coming in and were excited about capitalism becoming a thing in Russia and excited about their chance to get a piece of that pie. This is how Russia was able to get out of its conundrum. Because if you think about it, when you are a nation that relies on oil revenues for the vast majority of your income, and your infrastructure to produce those revenues is frozen up and has to be replaced for billions of dollars, you're in a catch-22. You need the oil money to pay for the repairs, but the repairs need to be done for you to generate the oil money. And so Russia is in an area where they require international support to be able to escape it. Now, the players who supported Russia and gave them the international support to escape this earlier are probably not going to be willing to do that anymore, because Russia is now in a situation where most of the international world is upset with them. Russia has invaded Ukraine, and people are talking about making Russia pay reparations, not about giving aid to Russia to prop up their economy. So that's bad news for them. Even more than that, Russia likely won't be able to turn to China for help here either. And that's because of the signals that China has already been giving to Russia about their energy. Russia is obviously already currently in a situation where they are dependent on China for help with their energy infrastructure. And since Russia invaded Ukraine, they have been asking China to help them build a gas pipeline, not an oil pipeline, but a gas pipeline, the Power of Siberia 2, to go to Chinese territory and greatly increase their exports of natural gas to China. China has not been game to do this, at least not on conditions that are favorable to Russia and that Russia is willing to agree to. China has asked Russia, because they understand Russia's desperate position, for massive discounts that equal the subsidized price that Russians pay for their energy. And you have to understand that subsidized price is not very much at all. It's there as a benefit to the Russian people, one of the few benefits the Russian people get for being part of the Russian state: cheap energy. And China, basically, even though they know it puts Russia in a bad spot, has been unwilling to work with Russia without these huge concessions. So when we look at a potential oil pipeline problem of this scale that could arise if Russia's energy infrastructure is shut down because of, again, the sanctions and the bombings and the seizures of the shadow fleet, China is not going to be looking to Russia and saying, hey, here's a handout. They're going to be asking for a major concession to help Russia. And whatever that is, Russia does not have much to offer. So there could be a lot of things China asks for. And don't exclude land from that equation, because it might be the only thing Russia has left in this scenario. Now look at that. I made it through the entire video, and I'm not even cold. I know I get a lot of comments saying, hey, Paul, aren't you cold? Why don't you put on a jacket? Why don't you cover your ears? And the truth is that even though I go out in some very cold weather, I'm usually not very cold because even though it doesn't look like it, I am dressed appropriately. I have very good gear and jackets that I use that I really like. And if you want to check out any of that stuff, just check out the description of my videos and you can get your hands on that. And I'll get a small commission, which helps support the work on this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.